He was the best doctor in Nigeria, and he was also the love of my life. Do you know what it feels to be accused of committing a medical crime when you knew nothing about it? His career was going down the drain. He was always sad, always, he had this pent up anger within him that I couldn't help, even though I wanted to. It all had to do with the accusation that he killed someone on on the surgery table. This man was a man I loved, and I was going to do everything to get to the root of it, even if it meant me risking my life in order to exonerate him from the pain he has been going through for 7 years. I had to do what I had to do. It wasn't easy, it wasn't thoughtful, it wasn't what I wanted for my life. But because of the man I love, I will go to any length to make him happy. Please watch this.
There were certain names in Nigeria that carried so much influence that they seemed larger than life. Names that appeared regularly on television screens, magazine covers, business journals, and social media feeds. Names that represented power, prestige, and success on a scale most people could only dream about. And among those names, none commanded more fascination than Jason Jack Daniels. To the public, Jason was the complete package. He was the brilliant neurosurgeon whose groundbreaking surgical techniques had saved countless lives, the billionaire heir to the Daniels medical empire, a network of hospitals and healthcare facilities spread across Nigeria and beyond, and one of the most eligible bachelors in the country, a man whose handsome face had become almost as famous as his extraordinary medical achievements. Women admired him. Men respected him. The media adored him. Every year, magazines competed for exclusive interviews, while wealthy families quietly hoped he might one day marry one of their daughters. At 34 years old, Jason Jack Daniels appeared to have everything a man could possibly want. Money, status, power, influence, success. Yet, every single person who envied him would have been shocked to discover that Jason spent most nights staring at the ceiling of his luxurious penthouse apartment in Victoria Island, unable to sleep, haunted by memories that refused to leave him alone. Because beneath the carefully constructed image of perfection was a man carrying a burden so heavy that it had slowly transformed him into someone even he barely recognized. The darkness had begun 7 years earlier. Back then, Jason had been younger, more optimistic, and foolish enough to believe that talent alone could protect him from the ugliness of the world. He had been one of the youngest neurosurgeons ever appointed at Lagos Elite Medical Center, a rising star whose future seemed limitless. Then came the surgery that changed everything. A high-profile patient had been admitted to the hospital following a severe neurological emergency that required immediate intervention. The case had attracted enormous attention due to the patient's influence and wealth. Every major stakeholder in the hospital had been watching closely. The surgery itself had been complex, dangerous, unpredictable, and despite everyone's best efforts, the patient had died. What followed had been worse than the loss itself. The media storm that erupted afterward nearly destroyed Jason's career before it had truly begun. Television stations debated his competence. Newspapers questioned his judgment. Social media branded him reckless. For months, his name became synonymous with failure. Although official investigations eventually concluded and public attention moved elsewhere, the damage had already been done. The hospital quietly buried the incident. The board moved on. The public forgot. Jason never did. Because every time he closed his eyes, he remembered that operating room, the bright lights, the urgent voices, the desperate attempts to save a life slipping away, the feeling of helplessness, the crushing weight of guilt, and perhaps most painful of all, the endless question that followed him ever since. What if he could have done something differently? That question had become his prison. Instead of allowing himself to heal, Jason threw himself deeper into work. He stopped dating, stopped attending social events, stopped building meaningful relationships. He convinced himself that medicine was enough. If he saved enough lives, perhaps the ghost would finally leave him alone. If he worked hard enough, perhaps the memories would lose their power. If he never allowed himself to become vulnerable again, perhaps he would never experience that kind of pain again. Years passed. His reputation recovered. His wealth multiplied. His influence expanded. But emotionally, he remained frozen. The walls around his heart became higher, stronger, impossible to penetrate. At least that was what he believed. On a bright Monday morning in Lagos, Jason arrived at Lagos Elite Medical Center before sunrise, as he always did. The hospital was quieter at that hour. The corridors were less crowded. The atmosphere felt calmer. It was one of the few moments during the day when he could think clearly. Dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit beneath his white doctor's coat, Jason walked through the hospital lobby with the effortless confidence of a man accustomed to command. Staff members greeted him respectfully as he passed. Nurses straightened slightly. Junior doctors exchanged nervous glances. Even patients seemed reassured simply by seeing him. Jason acknowledged everyone politely, but he rarely lingered long enough for conversation. Professional, efficient, distant. That was how most people described him. As he entered the executive elevator leading toward the surgical department, he reviewed the day's schedule on his tablet. 3 consultations, 1 board meeting, 2 major surgeries, and orientation for the new group of surgical residents. Normally, resident orientation held little interest for him. Every year, eager young doctors arrived hoping to learn from some of the country's best specialists. Most faded into the background after a few weeks. Few ever stood out. Jason expected this year to be no different. Several floors above, Marigold Ferdinand stepped nervously out of another elevator and adjusted the sleeves of her white coat. Unlike many of her colleagues, she had not come from wealth or privilege. Everything she had achieved had been earned through relentless determination, sleepless nights, and countless sacrifices. Becoming a surgical resident at Lagos Elite Medical Center represented the biggest opportunity of her life, and she intended to prove she deserved every bit of it. At 28 years old, Marigold possessed a rare combination of intelligence, discipline, and quiet resilience. Life had taught her early that nothing worth having came easily. So, while some of the new residents spent the morning discussing celebrity surgeons and hospital gossip, Marigold focused entirely on the career she had worked so hard to build. Unfortunately, that focus became much harder to maintain the moment she entered the operating theater observation gallery. A complicated neurosurgical procedure was already underway below. Doctors and nurses moved with practiced precision around the patient. Machines beeped steadily. The atmosphere was intense, controlled, mesmerizing. At the center of it all stood Jason Jack Daniels. Marigold had seen photographs before. Everyone in Nigeria had. But photographs failed to capture the presence he carried. The absolute concentration. The quiet authority. The confidence that seemed to fill every corner of the room. For several moments, she found herself unable to look away. Not because he was handsome, although he undeniably was, but because there was something else about him, something hidden, something sad. Even from a distance, she sensed it. As though he were carrying a weight no one else could see. Below, Jason briefly glanced toward the observation gallery. His eyes moved across the group of residents, then stopped. For reasons he couldn't immediately explain, his attention settled on one face. A woman with intelligent eyes and an expression of complete focus. Unlike the others, she wasn't staring at him. She was studying the procedure, learning, observing, thinking. Something about her presence felt different, unexpected, interesting. For the first time in a very long time, Jason found himself curious. The moment lasted only seconds before he returned his attention to the surgery. Yet somehow, neither of them completely forgot it. Neither understood why. Neither realized how significant that brief encounter would eventually become. Because fate had quietly set something into motion that morning. A story neither of them could yet see. A story woven from old wounds, buried truths, dangerous secrets, and unexpected love. And before it was over, it would force both Jason Jack Daniels and Marigold Ferdinand to confront the very things they had spent years trying to escape. The first few weeks of Marigold Ferdinand's residency at Lagos Elite Medical Center passed in a blur of exhausting shifts, endless patient rounds, emergency cases, and sleepless nights that left her surviving on little more than determination and caffeine. Yet, despite the overwhelming pressure that came with working at one of the most prestigious hospitals in Nigeria, she quickly established herself as someone impossible to overlook. Unlike many residents who spent their first months nervously trying to avoid mistakes, Marigold approached every challenge with a calm confidence that immediately caught the attention of senior doctors, consultants, and even the notoriously demanding surgeons who rarely handed out praise. She asked intelligent questions. She learned quickly. She remained composed under pressure. And most importantly, she genuinely cared about her patients. Within a short time, people throughout the hospital began talking about her. Some admired her, others envied her. A few even predicted that she would become one of the country's leading surgeons someday. Marigold, however, paid little attention to the growing reputation surrounding her. She had not come to Lagos Elite Medical Center to make friends or impress people. She had come to become the best surgeon she could possibly be. Nothing else mattered, or at least that was what she kept telling herself. Unfortunately, there was one particular distraction she found increasingly difficult to ignore. Jason Jack Daniels. The first time she had seen him in the operating theater, she had convinced herself that her reaction had been nothing more than admiration for a highly respected surgeon. After all, countless doctors across Nigeria looked up to Jason. There was nothing unusual about that, but as the days turned into weeks, Marigold began realizing that what she felt whenever he was nearby had very little to do with professional admiration. Whenever he entered a room, she noticed. Whenever he spoke, she listened. Whenever he praised her work, she found herself thinking about those words long after the conversation ended. It frustrated her more than she cared to admit. She had spent years focused entirely on her education and career. Relationships had never been a priority. Love had never been a distraction she wanted. Yet somehow, the one man she knew she should avoid seemed to appear everywhere. The situation became even worse when Jason started requesting her presence during certain surgeries. Officially, the reason was simple. She was talented, efficient, reliable, but Marigold couldn't ignore the small sense of satisfaction she felt each time her name appeared on his surgical team roster. One particularly busy Thursday evening, the hospital found itself dealing with multiple emergencies simultaneously after a major road accident on 3rd Mainland Bridge left several patients critically injured. Doctors rushed through corridors. Nurses moved urgently between wards. The emergency department descended into controlled chaos. Marigold had already been working for nearly 16 hours when she received instructions to report immediately to Operating Theater 3. She arrived breathless and exhausted. Jason was already there. Dressed in surgical scrubs, his attention remained fixed on the patient lying unconscious on the operating table. Without looking up, he began issuing instructions. "You're assisting me." Marigold blinked. "Me?" For the first time, Jason glanced in her direction. "Unless another Marigold Ferdinand is standing behind you." Despite her exhaustion, she nearly smiled. Almost. The surgery lasted for hours, complicated, demanding, relentless. Several times during the procedure, unexpected complications threatened the patient's survival. Several times, Marigold responded quickly enough to help prevent disaster. When the operation finally ended successfully shortly after midnight, everyone in the room released a collective sigh of relief. As the others gradually dispersed, Marigold remained behind helping organize equipment and complete reports. To her surprise, Jason stayed as well. The operating theater had become unusually quiet. The intense pressure that had dominated the previous hours had finally lifted. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Jason broke the silence. "You handled yourself well today." The compliment was simple, direct, yet hearing it from him felt strangely significant. "Thank you," Marigold replied. Jason nodded slightly. "You didn't panic." "I wanted to." That earned the faintest hint of amusement from him. Most people do. For a brief moment, they simply looked at one another. And something shifted. Something neither of them wanted to acknowledge. The attraction that had quietly existed beneath the surface suddenly felt impossible to ignore. Fortunately, Jason ended the moment before it could become dangerous. Unfortunately, that only made it worse. Because afterward, both of them found themselves thinking about the conversation far more than they should have. As weeks continued passing, similar moments became increasingly common. Late-night consultations, unexpected meetings in hospital corridors, long discussions about difficult cases, conversations that started professionally but somehow lingered longer than necessary. Neither crossed any boundaries. Neither said anything inappropriate. Yet the tension between them continued growing. People began noticing. Nurses exchanged knowing looks, residents whispered, even some consultants appeared amused. Jason noticed all of it, and he hated it. Not because the rumors were entirely wrong, but because they were becoming increasingly difficult to deny. The truth was simple. He was attracted to Marigold, far more attracted than he had any right to be. And that terrified him. Because Jason had spent years carefully building walls around himself, walls designed to keep people out, walls designed to protect him from pain, walls designed to prevent exactly this kind of emotional vulnerability. Marigold threatened every one of those defenses. Worse still, she had absolutely no idea how dangerous getting close to him could be. Because while everyone else had moved on from the scandal that nearly destroyed his career years earlier, Jason knew the story was not over. The secrets buried beneath that case remained alive, waiting, hidden, dangerous. One afternoon, while reviewing archived medical records for a research assignment, Marigold stumbled across something unusual. At first it seemed insignificant, just another old patient file, another completed case, another tragedy among thousands. Yet one particular name immediately caught her attention. Dr. Jason Jack Daniels. Her curiosity deepened. She knew enough about hospital history to recognize the case. It was the infamous surgery that had dominated headlines years earlier. The operation many believed had nearly ended Jason's career. As she continued reading, something felt wrong. Certain documents appeared incomplete. Several reports referenced materials that were no longer attached. Important information seemed missing. Almost as though someone had deliberately removed parts of the file. The discovery unsettled her. Even more unsettling was the reaction she received when she casually mentioned the case later that day. The conversation happened inside the doctor's lounge. Several senior physicians had been discussing past medical controversies. Marigold simply asked an innocent question. The effect was immediate. Silence. Complete silence. Faces changed. Expressions hardened. One consultant abruptly changed the subject. Another excused himself entirely. The atmosphere became so uncomfortable that Marigold immediately regretted asking. As she left the room, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had accidentally touched something dangerous. Something people desperately wanted forgotten. That suspicion only grew stronger over the following days. Every time she encountered references to the case, similar reactions followed. Whispers stopped when she approached. Conversations ended abruptly. Certain doctors avoided eye contact altogether. And one name kept appearing repeatedly throughout various records connected to the incident. Professor Gabriel Adeyemi, a respected senior surgeon, a powerful member of the hospital board, one of the most influential figures in Nigerian medicine. Yet whenever his name appeared alongside discussions of the old surgery, people became visibly nervous. It made no sense. And Marigold hated mysteries, especially ones hidden inside a hospital. Meanwhile, Jason began noticing her growing interest in the case. The realization filled him with unease. For years, the truth had remained buried. The people responsible had ensured that happened. But Marigold was intelligent, persistent, fearless, exactly the type of person who wouldn't stop asking questions. And if she continued digging, she might uncover things far more dangerous than she realized. Because somewhere inside Lagos Elite Medical Center existed secrets powerful enough to destroy careers, reputations, and lives. Secrets connected to a patient who died. A surgery gone wrong. and a cover-up that still terrified some of the hospital's most powerful people. Most frightening of all, the closer Marigold moved toward the truth, the closer she moved toward becoming a target herself. By the middle of her second month at Lagos Elite Medical Center, Marigold Ferdinand had developed a reputation for being the kind of doctor who never accepted information at face value, a trait that had served her well throughout medical school and continued proving useful during residency, especially in a hospital where people seemed remarkably comfortable pretending certain questions did not deserve answers. The strange reactions she continued receiving whenever the old surgical scandal involving Jason Jack Daniels was mentioned had only strengthened her curiosity. The more people avoided the subject, the more she wanted to understand it. The more doors appeared closed, the more determined she became to find out what was hidden behind them. At first, she told herself that her interest was purely academic. After all, controversial surgical cases were often used as learning tools. Understanding what had gone wrong could help future doctors avoid similar mistakes. That explanation sounded reasonable enough. Unfortunately, even Marigold knew she was lying to herself. Part of her curiosity had everything to do with Jason. The man fascinated her in ways she neither expected nor welcomed. Every day she spent working alongside him only deepened the mystery surrounding him. She had seen his brilliance firsthand, his precision, his patience, his ability to remain calm even when lives hung in the balance. Nothing about him resembled the reckless surgeon described in the scandalous articles she had found online. The two versions of Jason simply did not match. One of them had to be wrong, and Marigold intended to find out which one. The opportunity arrived unexpectedly on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. A senior consultant assigned her a presentation involving advances in neurosurgical procedures over the past decade, and instructed her to gather historical case studies from the hospital archives. The assignment seemed straightforward enough. By 4 o'clock that afternoon, she found herself descending into the lower levels of the hospital where decades of medical records were stored. Unlike the modern floors above, the archive department felt almost forgotten. The narrow hallways were quiet. The lighting was dimmer. Rows upon rows of cabinets stretched endlessly across large rooms filled with old documents, patient files, and historical records dating back many years. The atmosphere felt strangely isolated from the rest of the hospital, almost secretive. An elderly records officer directed her toward a section containing archived neurological cases before leaving her alone to continue her research. For nearly 2 hours, Marigold reviewed surgical reports and treatment records, carefully taking notes for her presentation. Most of the files were routine, interesting but unremarkable. Then she noticed something unusual. One particular cabinet drawer had been incorrectly labeled. The numbering sequence didn't match surrounding records. Curious, she pulled it open. Inside sat a single dark file folder. No color coding, no departmental stamp, no identifying markers beyond a small reference number written in faded black ink. Something about it immediately felt out of place. Marigold hesitated, then opened it. The moment she read the first page, her pulse quickened. The patient's name wasn't familiar. The diagnosis wasn't unusual. But the lead surgeon listed on the case made her stomach tighten. Dr. Jason Jack Daniels. She stared at the document, then read it again. And again. There was no mistake. This was the infamous case, the surgery, the patient death, the scandal that had nearly destroyed one of Nigeria's most celebrated surgeons. For several moments, she simply sat there reading every page she could find. The official narrative appeared straightforward. The patient had undergone a highly complicated neurological procedure. Complications occurred during surgery. The patient died shortly afterward. The investigation concluded that errors in judgment contributed significantly to the outcome. Case closed. Yet something felt wrong almost immediately. The documentation was incomplete. Important sections appeared missing. Several pages referenced attached reports that were nowhere to be found. Witness statements ended abruptly. Critical observations had been removed entirely. Even stranger, portions of the timeline appeared inconsistent. Certain events referenced information that simply wasn't included anywhere else in the file. Marigold frowned. Years of academic training had taught her how medical records should look. This wasn't normal. This wasn't accidental. Someone had deliberately altered this file. Someone had removed evidence. The realization sent a chill down her spine. She continued searching through the folder, hoping additional documents might provide answers. Instead, the deeper she looked, the stranger everything became. Several signatures appeared photocopied rather than original. Entire sections seemed rewritten. Names had been blacked out. Pages had been renumbered. It looked less like a medical file and more like a crime scene. For nearly an hour, she remained absorbed in the documents. The rain outside intensified. Thunder echoed faintly overhead. Time slipped away unnoticed. Eventually, she checked her watch and realized evening rounds would begin soon. Reluctantly, she gathered her notes and decided to return the following day to continue her investigation. Carefully placing the folder back where she found it, she left the archive room. She had no idea that someone had been watching. The following morning, Marigold returned before sunrise. Her mind had barely focused on anything else all night. Questions swirled endlessly inside her head.
He didn't know that what I was trying to do was just to help him through the situation. Marigold just wanted to know what happened, and she was not going to stop until she got the answers she needed, because this man was the man she admired. It was a man she has heard about while doing her residency. It was a man she wanted to work with. But getting close to him, she realized that he was unhappy. He was always by himself, and she needed to do something, and she was getting close. The question is, did she succeed, or was she cut short? Because the people that buried this evidence were not just going to let it out of where it was hidden, because it had to do with life and death. So yeah, did she succeed?
Why were documents missing? Who removed them? Why had nobody questioned the inconsistencies? And most importantly, what really happened during that surgery? Determined to continue her research, she hurried directly toward the archive department. The moment she reached the cabinet, her stomach dropped. The drawer was empty, completely empty. The file was gone. She checked again. Then searched neighboring cabinets. Nothing. The folder had vanished. Confusion quickly transformed into unease. Files didn't simply disappear. Especially not highly restricted files connected to one of the hospital's biggest controversies. Someone had removed it. Recently. Possibly within hours of her discovering it. A cold feeling settled inside her chest. Someone knew she had accessed the file. Upstairs on one of the executive floors, Jason Jack Daniels was sitting alone inside his office when an email notification appeared on his computer screen. Ordinarily, he ignored most administrative messages. This one immediately caught his attention. Restricted Archive Access Report. His pulse slowed, then stopped altogether. The report contained only a few lines. A resident physician had accessed the historical case file connected to the surgery scandal 7 years earlier. Resident name: Dr. Marigold Ferdinand. For several seconds, Jason simply stared at the screen. The blood drained from his face. A familiar sensation gripped him. Fear. Real fear. The kind he had not experienced in years. Because he knew exactly what file she had found. And he knew exactly why that file had been hidden. The memories returned instantly. The operating room, the dying patient, the panic, the lies, the cover-up, the betrayal. Most people believed the scandal had ended years ago. Jason knew better. The truth had never disappeared. It had simply been buried. Buried beneath altered records. Buried beneath institutional power. Buried beneath the influence of people wealthy enough to rewrite reality itself. The patient had not died because of Jason. He had known that from the beginning. The official investigation was a lie. The public narrative was a lie. Even portions of the hospital records were lies. Someone else had made the fatal mistake. Someone whose family possessed enough influence to avoid accountability. Rather than expose the truth, powerful members of the hospital board chose a different solution. Protect the guilty, sacrifice the innocent. And Jason had become the perfect scapegoat. His career survived. Barely. But the truth remained hidden. Because exposing it would implicate some of the most powerful individuals in Nigerian medicine. People who still controlled careers, hospitals, governments, lives. Jason immediately stood. His jaw tightened. His breathing became uneven. For years he had prayed nobody would reopen the case. Nobody would start asking questions. Nobody would uncover what really happened. Now Marigold had stumbled directly into the center of it. And if she continued digging, she would eventually discover something far more dangerous than missing documents. She would discover people willing to destroy anyone who threatened their secrets. People who had spent 7 years ensuring the truth never surfaced. People who still occupied offices inside Lagos Elite Medical Center. As Jason stared through the glass walls of his office toward the city skyline beyond, a terrible realization settled over him. Marigold wasn't just chasing a mystery anymore. She had unknowingly stepped into a battlefield, and somewhere inside the hospital, someone had already noticed. For the first time since joining Lagos Elite Medical Center, Marigold Ferdinand found herself standing thousands of miles away from Nigeria, gazing through the enormous glass windows of a luxury hotel overlooking the River Thames as the early morning sunlight spilled across London's skyline, painting the city in shades of gold and silver that seemed almost unreal compared to the familiar chaos and energy of Lagos. The International Neurosurgical Excellence Conference was one of the most prestigious medical events in the world, attracting renowned surgeons, researchers, specialists, and healthcare innovators from every continent, and being selected to attend represented a tremendous opportunity for any young doctor hoping to establish a name within the medical community. Marigold should have been thinking about presentations, research papers, networking opportunities, career advancement. Instead, her thoughts kept returning to one man, Jason Jack Daniels. The trip had placed them together far more often than either of them anticipated. Long flights, shared conference schedules, professional dinners, medical workshops, unexpected conversations between sessions. Without the constant interruptions of hospital life, the distance that normally existed between them had gradually begun disappearing. For the first time, Marigold was seeing sides of Jason that rarely surfaced back in Lagos. She discovered he possessed a surprisingly dry sense of humor hidden beneath his serious exterior. She learned he enjoyed classical music. She learned he preferred quiet evenings over extravagant social events despite his billionaire status. Most importantly, she discovered that the man everyone viewed as untouchable was, in reality, deeply lonely. The realization affected her more than she wanted to admit. Meanwhile, Jason found himself struggling against emotions he had spent years suppressing. Every instinct warned him to keep his distance. Every painful memory reminded him why he had built walls around his heart. Yet those walls seemed increasingly fragile whenever Marigold was nearby. She challenged him, interested him, made him laugh, made him feel things he thought were gone forever. For the first time in years, Jason began imagining possibilities he had long convinced himself no longer existed. A future, a relationship, happiness. The thoughts frightened him almost as much as they excited him, because hope had once nearly destroyed him. And he wasn't certain he could survive losing it again. On the third evening of the conference, after attending a series of lectures and networking events, Marigold returned to her hotel room feeling exhausted but satisfied. The conference had exceeded every expectation. She had met leading surgeons from around the world, presented research, learned new techniques. Everything seemed to be going perfectly. Then her phone vibrated. At first, she assumed it was a routine message from a colleague back in Lagos. Instead, she discovered an email from an unknown sender. No name, no identifying information, no explanation, only a single sentence. If you want the truth about Jason Jack Daniels, read the attachments. A cold sensation spread through her chest. Immediately alert, Marigold downloaded the files. What she found left her speechless. The documents appeared connected to the surgery scandal from 7 years earlier. At first glance, they looked similar to records she had previously examined, But these files were different. Very different. They contained information missing from the official hospital records, original witness statements, internal communications, partial investigation notes, unedited surgical observations. The more she read, the more disturbed she became. Entire sections of the official narrative appeared fabricated. Important testimonies had been altered. Several medical assessments contradicted the hospital's conclusions. Most shocking of all, numerous documents suggested Jason had repeatedly warned senior personnel about complications developing during the operation. Warnings that had apparently been ignored. Marigold spent hours studying every page, comparing timelines, analyzing statements, reviewing evidence. And with every new discovery, one conclusion became increasingly difficult to avoid. Jason may have been innocent. The possibility transformed everything. For years, the public had believed he was responsible for the patient's death. The hospital had supported that version of events. The media had amplified it. Yet the evidence sitting in front of her painted a completely different picture. Someone had manipulated the investigation. Someone had altered records. Someone had deliberately redirected blame. The question was why? And more importantly, who? The following day, Marigold found herself watching Jason differently. Not because her feelings had changed. If anything, they had grown stronger. But because she now carried information he didn't know she possessed. Information capable of reopening wounds he had spent years trying to bury. During a lunch break between conference sessions, they found themselves seated together in a quiet restaurant overlooking the city. The atmosphere felt unusually relaxed, comfortable, natural. For several minutes, they discussed medicine, travel, and conference presentations. Then Marigold noticed something. The moment conversation drifted toward professional controversies and medical scandals, Jason's expression changed. The warmth disappeared. The tension returned. The walls reappeared, as though a shadow had suddenly crossed his face. It wasn't merely guilt. She realized that instantly. It looked more like pain. The kind of pain carried by someone who had been deeply wronged, someone who had never received justice. That realization only strengthened her suspicions. Later that evening, another anonymous message arrived. This one contained a single scanned document. Marigold stared at it for nearly 10 minutes. It appeared to be an internal hospital memorandum dated shortly after the controversial surgery. One sentence immediately captured her attention. Protect Dr. Adeyemi's son from unnecessary exposure. Her heartbeat accelerated. The name was familiar. Professor Gabriel Adeyemi. The powerful board member whose name kept appearing whenever the old case surfaced. The same man whose presence seemed to make hospital staff nervous. The same man connected to countless inconsistencies throughout the investigation. Suddenly, pieces began falling into place. If the memorandum was genuine, then the surgery scandal wasn't merely a tragic medical error, it was a cover-up. A deliberate effort to shield someone important, someone connected to hospital leadership, someone influential enough to manipulate investigations and rewrite official records. And if that was true, then Jason had spent 7 years carrying blame that never belonged to him. Marigold felt physically sick, not only because of the injustice, but because she now understood the depth of suffering Jason had endured. The loneliness, the isolation, the guilt, the emotional walls. Everything suddenly made sense. Yet, one terrifying fact remained. Whoever orchestrated the cover-up had never been exposed, which meant they still possessed power, still possessed influence, still occupied a position within Lagos Elite Medical Center. As London glittered outside her hotel window that night, Marigold sat alone reviewing the documents one final time. The evidence was becoming impossible to ignore. Someone had sacrificed an innocent surgeon. Someone had manipulated witnesses. Someone had altered medical records. Someone had buried the truth. And unless she was mistaken, the person responsible remained dangerously close. Back in Lagos, they continued walking the same hospital corridors, attending the same meetings, making the same decisions, waiting, watching. and perhaps already aware that after 7 long years, the truth was finally beginning to surface. The moment Marigold Ferdinand returned to Lagos from London, she knew there was no turning back. The city looked exactly the same as it always had. The crowded roads, the endless traffic, the towering buildings stretching across Victoria Island. The familiar rhythm of life continuing, as though nothing had changed. Yet everything had changed. Because she had boarded the flight to London with questions and returned carrying pieces of a truth powerful enough to destroy some of the most respected names in Nigerian medicine. For several days after her return, Marigold attempted to convince herself that she should let the matter go. She was a surgical resident, not an investigator, not a journalist, not a lawyer. Her responsibility was to save lives and build her career. Nothing more. Yet every time she thought about the documents she had received in London, she felt the same overwhelming sense of injustice tightening inside her chest. Someone had destroyed an innocent man's reputation. Someone had allowed him to suffer for years. Someone had manipulated an entire institution to protect the real culprit. And somehow everyone involved had continued living their lives as though nothing had happened. The thought made her furious. Jason deserved the truth. Whether he wanted it or not, whether it changed anything or not, he deserved the truth. Determined to continue investigating, Marigold began quietly gathering information whenever opportunities presented themselves. She reviewed archived reports, compared timelines, cross-referenced old personnel records, examined witness statements, studied board meeting summaries. What initially appeared to be scattered inconsistencies gradually began forming a disturbing pattern. The same names appeared repeatedly, the same departments, the same administrators, the same influential figures. Every road seemed to lead back to a small group of people who had occupied positions of power during the original investigation. The closer she moved toward answers, however, the more resistance she encountered. At first, the warnings seemed harmless. One afternoon, a senior consultant unexpectedly called her into his office after a surgical briefing. The man had always treated her professionally, which made his serious expression immediately concerning. After closing the door behind her, he leaned back in his chair and studied her quietly. "You're a talented doctor, Marigold." She nodded politely. "Thank you, sir. You have an excellent future ahead of you." Something about his tone made her uneasy. "Is there a problem?" The consultant sighed heavily, then folded his hands together. "My advice is simple." His gaze sharpened. "Stop asking questions about the Daniels case." The room suddenly felt colder. Marigold maintained a calm expression. "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do." The silence that followed felt uncomfortable, almost threatening. Finally, the consultant spoke again. "Some stories are better left buried." When Marigold left his office several minutes later, her heartbeat remained elevated long afterward. The warning had been polite, but the message was unmistakable. Stay away from the truth. Unfortunately for the people issuing these warnings, they had badly misjudged her character. Marigold had spent her entire life overcoming obstacles. Intimidation had never worked on her before. It wasn't going to work now. The situation escalated quickly. Within a week, strange things began happening. Access permissions she normally possessed suddenly disappeared. Research requests were denied without explanation. Meetings were rescheduled. Documents became difficult to obtain. Even routine administrative processes started becoming unusually complicated. Someone was creating obstacles. Someone knew exactly what she was investigating. Someone wanted her frustrated enough to quit. Then came the messages. The first arrived late at night while she was reviewing patient notes inside her apartment. Unknown number. No identification. No explanation, only 6 words. "Leave the past where it belongs." Marigold stared at the screen. Her stomach tightened. A second message arrived 2 days later. "Some truths destroy more lives than lies." Then another. "Stop digging before you regret it." The messages were never overtly threatening. They didn't need to be. Their purpose was obvious. Fear, intimidation, control. Instead of frightening her, however, they confirmed something important. She was getting closer. Much closer. Meanwhile, Jason noticed the changes almost immediately. He noticed the tension in her expression, the exhaustion beneath her eyes, the distraction that occasionally stole her attention during conversations. He suspected the investigation was consuming her. What he didn't know was how far she had already progressed, or how dangerous things were becoming. One evening after finishing a particularly difficult surgery, Jason found her sitting alone inside a quiet hospital conference room reviewing files. The sight instantly concerned him. She looked exhausted, frustrated, determined, all at once. "You should be home," he said gently. Marigold looked up. For a moment, her expression softened. "That's what everyone keeps telling me." Jason stepped closer. "You don't always have to carry everything yourself." The simple statement affected her more than it should have, because he had no idea how much she needed to hear it, or how much of this battle she was fighting for him. The following week brought the breakthrough that changed everything. It happened by accident. A retired nurse who had worked at Lagos Elite Medical Center during the original surgery agreed to meet Marigold privately after weeks of hesitation. The meeting took place in a small cafe away from the hospital. The elderly woman appeared nervous throughout the conversation. Several times she glanced over her shoulder before speaking. When she finally began talking, her words shattered everything. "The wrong person paid the price." Marigold leaned forward immediately. "What do you mean?" The nurse lowered her voice. "The mistake wasn't made by Jason." Marigold's pulse accelerated. The woman continued. "The patient was being treated by another surgeon." Silence filled the table. Then came the revelation. The surgeon was Professor Adeyemi's son. Marigold froze. Every theory, every suspicion, every inconsistency. Suddenly, they all made sense. The nurse explained that during the operation, a reckless decision had been made, a decision that triggered catastrophic complications. The mistake should have ended a promising career. It should have resulted in disciplinary action. It should have been investigated honestly. Instead, powerful individuals intervened. Hospital executives, board members, influential figures, people with enough authority to reshape the entire narrative. Medical records were altered. Statements were rewritten. Witnesses were pressured. Evidence disappeared. And when the dust settled, responsibility somehow landed on Jason Jack Daniels, a young surgeon with enormous potential, a convenient scapegoat, a sacrifice offered to protect someone more important. Marigold sat speechless. The weight of the revelation settled heavily inside her chest. For years, Jason had carried guilt that never belonged to him. For years, people whispered about him, judged him, questioned him. For years, he had silently endured a burden created by other people's lies. The injustice felt almost unbearable. When she finally left the cafe, one truth had become impossible to deny. The conspiracy was real, not a rumor, not a theory, not speculation, real. And now she possessed enough information to threaten everyone involved, which meant those people would become more desperate than ever. Because secrets protected for 7 years do not unravel quietly. They fight back, they resist, they destroy. As Marigold drove through the evening traffic of Lagos, another anonymous message appeared on her phone. This time the words felt different, shorter, sharper, more dangerous. "You were warned." For several moments she stared at the screen, then slowly locked the phone. Because for the first time since this journey began, she understood exactly why powerful people were trying so hard to stop her. The cover-up was no longer a suspicion. It was a fact. And somewhere inside Lagos Elite Medical Center, the people responsible were beginning to realize that the truth they had buried years ago was finally clawing its way back to the surface. The storm that had been building for 7 long years finally arrived on a humid Thursday morning in Lagos. And by the time the sun set that evening, careers had been destroyed. Reputations had collapsed. Powerful men had fallen from their carefully constructed pedestals, and a truth buried beneath layers of lies, corruption, intimidation, and institutional protection had finally been dragged into the light where it could no longer be ignored. For weeks, Marigold Ferdinand had continued gathering evidence with relentless determination, carefully documenting every inconsistency she discovered, preserving every witness statement she obtained and organizing every piece of information connected to the surgery scandal that had nearly destroyed Jason Jack Daniels' life. What had started as curiosity had evolved into something far greater: a mission, a responsibility, a fight for justice. And now, for the first time since the investigation began, she possessed enough evidence to expose the entire conspiracy. The question was whether anyone powerful enough would allow it to happen. Inside Lagos Elite Medical Center, tension had become impossible to ignore. Doctors whispered in hallways. Administrators held emergency meetings behind closed doors. Board members arrived unexpectedly at the hospital at unusual hours. Rumors spread through every department. Everyone knew something significant was happening. Nobody knew exactly how serious the situation truly was. Meanwhile, Jason sat alone inside his office, staring at the city's skyline beyond the glass walls. For years, he had dreamed about clearing his name. For years, he had imagined what it might feel like to finally expose the people responsible for destroying his reputation. Yet now that the opportunity was finally within reach, he felt surprisingly conflicted. Because this battle was no longer only about him. It was about Marigold. And that terrified him. The deeper she became involved, the greater the risk she faced. Powerful people rarely surrendered without retaliation. People capable of orchestrating a cover-up for 7 years were capable of far worse. Jason knew that better than anyone. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Marigold entered. She looked exhausted, determined, unshaken. The sight of her immediately eased some of the tension inside him. "You should go home," he said quietly. Marigold smiled faintly. "You keep saying that." "Because I mean it." Her expression softened. "And I keep saying no." For several moments, neither spoke. The silence between them felt comfortable now. Natural. The kind of silence shared by people who understood one another without needing words. Finally, Jason sighed. "They're going to come after you." "I know." "You could lose your residency." "I know." "You could lose everything you've worked for." Marigold took another step closer. "So could you." The simple response left him speechless. Because she wasn't fighting for him out of obligation. She wasn't helping because she felt sorry for him. She was standing beside him because she genuinely believed it was the right thing to do. And for the first time in years, Jason realized he wasn't fighting alone. 3 days later, the explosion finally began. The evidence package Marigold had assembled was delivered simultaneously to regulatory authorities, independent investigators, legal representatives, and several respected national media organizations. The reaction was immediate. Within hours, journalists began contacting hospital administrators. Questions flooded social media. Television stations interrupted regular programming to discuss the allegations. Medical associations demanded answers. The story spread across Nigeria with astonishing speed. A celebrated surgeon may have been framed. A major hospital may have concealed evidence. Powerful board members may have manipulated an investigation. The public was outraged. And for the first time, the people responsible found themselves unable to control the narrative. Emergency board meetings were called. Lawyers rushed into conference rooms. Public relations teams worked frantically to contain the damage, but it was already too late. The truth had escaped, and truth, once released, rarely agreed to return to captivity. The pressure intensified dramatically when several former hospital employees came forward publicly. Nurses, administrators, junior doctors. Individuals who had remained silent for years suddenly found the courage to speak. Their testimonies supported Marigold's findings. Their accounts confirmed the existence of missing documents, altered records, witness intimidation, institutional interference. The wall of lies that had protected the conspiracy for years began collapsing piece by piece. Then came the revelation that shook the country. Professor Gabriel Adeyemi's son had indeed been involved in the original surgery. Evidence proved he had made the critical error. Evidence proved senior officials knew about it. Evidence proved they deliberately redirected blame. The scandal exploded. Medical commentators called it one of the most disturbing cover-ups in Nigerian healthcare history. Public trust evaporated almost overnight. Investors began distancing themselves. Government regulators launched formal investigations. The hospital board descended into chaos. Yet amid the collapse, one question remained unanswered. Who had orchestrated everything? Because while several people participated in the cover-up, someone had directed it. Someone had coordinated the deception. Someone had spent 7 years ensuring the truth remained hidden. And that person remained unidentified, at least for a little while longer. The answer arrived unexpectedly. Late one evening, while reviewing newly released investigation materials, Marigold discovered a series of internal communications that had somehow escaped previous scrutiny. Most appeared routine, administrative, unimportant. Until she noticed one particular signature. Her blood ran cold. She checked again, then again, praying she was mistaken. She wasn't. The documents pointed toward someone neither she nor Jason had ever suspected. Someone respected, trusted, admired. Someone who had remained close to the situation from the very beginning. Dr. Emmanuel Okafor, the hospital's long-serving chief medical director. Jason's mentor, the man who had guided his career, the man who had comforted him after the scandal, the man who had spent years pretending to support him, the man Jason trusted almost like a father. Marigold immediately brought the evidence to Jason. The moment he saw the documents, disbelief washed across his face. No. His voice barely rose above a whisper. No. He reviewed the records repeatedly, searching for mistakes, searching for alternative explanations, searching for anything that might prove the conclusion wrong. There was nothing. The evidence was overwhelming. Dr. Emmanuel Okafor had orchestrated the cover-up. Not to protect Jason, not to protect patients, not to protect the hospital, but to protect powerful allies whose influence benefited his own ambitions. The realization shattered something inside Jason. Because betrayal hurts most when it comes from someone you love. For several minutes, he simply sat there in silence. Years of trust, years of respect, years of loyalty, all revealed as lies. Marigold gently placed a hand over his. "I'm sorry." Jason closed his eyes, then slowly opened them again. For the first time since learning the truth years ago, he felt something unexpected. Peace. Not because the betrayal hurt less, but because the uncertainty was finally over. The mystery was solved. The lies were exposed. The burden was no longer his to carry. The following week, public hearings formally concluded. Multiple resignations followed. Criminal investigations expanded. Medical licenses were suspended. Professor Gabriel Adeyemi's son faced accountability. Dr. Emmanuel Okafor was arrested pending further proceedings. The hospital board underwent complete restructuring. Official statements cleared Jason Jack Daniels of wrongdoing. 7 years after being blamed for a tragedy he did not cause, his name was finally restored. Completely, publicly, unequivocally. As for Jason and Marigold, they stood together outside Lagos Elite Medical Center on the evening the final report was released. The setting sun painted the city in shades of gold. Traffic moved steadily in the distance. The world continued turning. Yet everything felt different. The darkness that had haunted Jason for years was finally gone. The truth had won. Justice had prevailed. And standing beside the woman who refused to abandon him even when every reason existed to walk away, Jason realized that fate had given him something far greater than vindication. It had given him a second chance. A future. A reason to hope again. Turning toward Marigold, he smiled. A genuine smile. Perhaps the first truly genuine one he had worn in years. And as she smiled back, both of them understood that while their battle had ended, their story was only beginning. Together. Exactly as it was always meant to be. 6 months later. The Lagos skyline shimmered beneath the golden glow of the evening sun as gentle music drifted through the beautifully decorated garden of the Daniels family's estate, where close friends, family members, colleagues, and well-wishers had gathered to celebrate something far more meaningful than success wealth, or professional achievement. They had gathered to celebrate love, a love that had survived secrets, a love that had survived fear, a love that had survived betrayal, heartbreak, and years of buried pain. Jason Jack Daniels stood beneath a canopy of white flowers, looking more relaxed and happier than anyone had seen him in years. For so long, he had lived like a man carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. Now that weight was gone. The darkness that had once haunted him no longer controlled him. The guilt had disappeared. The shame had vanished. The nightmares had finally stopped. And the reason was walking toward him at that very moment. Marigold Ferdinand. She looked breathtaking in her elegant ivory gown, her smile radiant enough to make everything else disappear. As their eyes met, Jason felt the same thing he had felt the first day he saw her standing in the operating theater. Only this time, the feeling was stronger, deeper, certain. He loved her, completely, endlessly, and without hesitation. Marigold reached him and slipped her hand into his. The gesture was simple, yet somehow it felt like home. For several moments, neither of them spoke. They simply stood there, smiling at each other while the people around them quietly watched. Finally, Jason broke the silence. "You know," he said softly, "there was a time when I honestly believed I would spend the rest of my life alone." Marigold squeezed his hand. "I know. I thought love wasn't meant for me." Her eyes softened. "And now?" Jason smiled. "Now I know I was simply waiting for you." A few emotional laughs echoed among their guests. Marigold shook her head playfully. "That was a very dangerous thing to say in front of this many witnesses." "I mean every word." His voice became gentler. "You walked into my life when I had nothing left to give. You saw the worst parts of me and stayed anyway. You fought for me when I couldn't fight for myself. You gave me back something I thought I'd lost forever." "What?" "Hope." Tears filled Marigold's eyes. The same happened to Jason. Neither bothered hiding them. Some moments deserved honesty. This was one of them. "I love you too," Marigold whispered. "And if I had to choose all over again, I would still choose you every single time." Jason lifted her hand and pressed a kiss against her fingers. Then he looked directly into her eyes. "Marigold Ferdinand, I want forever with you." Her smile trembled. "You already have it." The applause that followed echoed through the garden as Jason wrapped his arms around her and pulled her close. For the first time in many years, neither of them was looking backward. There were no secrets left, no lies, no shadows, only the future. And as the sun slowly disappeared beyond the Lagos horizon, Jason and Marigold stood together surrounded by the people they loved, knowing with complete certainty that whatever challenges life brought next, they would face them side by side. Together, forever. The end.
All what this story was all about is just teaching us that you don't have to write people off because of the things you heard about them. You don't have to to just feel that everybody, because they're saying the same thing, then it means the truth. You need to find the truth for yourself. You need to let people show you who they are before writing them off. That's exactly what Marigold did for Jason. She didn't let what she heard or what was being said about Jason blur her judgment about him. She wanted to know for herself, and that's exactly what she did. She thrived, she struggled, but she came out with the truth and she exonerated Jason, which was great. And it's all about love. It's all about going all out for the person you claim to love. So thank you for watching this story, and I would love to hear your thoughts about the story in the comment section. See you next time, my flowers.